You're listening to a Roddenberry podcast.
Mission Log Prodigy, a Roddenberry Star Trek podcast. Episode 19, Supernova. Part 1.
Welcome back into another episode of Mission Log Prodigy, a Roddenberry Star Trek podcast. I'm Norman Lau.
And I am Charlene Schmidt. Just like our flagship Mission Log podcast, each week here on Mission Log Prodigy, we're discussing each and every episode of this animated series. We discuss what makes each of them special, and we see if there's any morals, meanings, messages, and what did we learn? The most important question.
This week, the penultimate episode of Star Trek Prodigy Season 1, Episode 19, Supernova, Part 1. Now, please, I know that's a lot. Penultimate is such a great word, and it sounds so much better than like ultimate.
Next to last. Yeah, penultimate.
Yes, the penultimate.
Sounds bigger than ultimate.
And it sounds better than finale. And we're not quite there yet. The finale is going to be coming next week. This is the part 1 of a part 2 episode. So Please remember that Mission Log Prodigy is an in-depth review podcast. So if you've not seen Supernova part 1 yet, please put us on pause. Then come back after your thoughts have been blown, as your mind has been exploded with so many things. And then come back and hear us talk all about it.
Yes. We've had to reassemble our brains after they were blown to pieces too, so that we could have some concise thoughts on this, because so much happens. Oh my gosh. Whew. So a little bit of housekeeping before we get into it, though. Mission Log Prodigy is produced for YouTube and as a regular podcast. So please do all the things. If you're on the YouTube channel, subscribe, go to the playlist, watch all of our previous shows, give us comments, do all the cool things. If you're on podcasts, hey, you can find everything you're looking for at podcast.roddenberry.com, and any podcatcher of your choice will help you get them. You can also follow Mission Log Prodigy on Twitter at ML_Prodigy. And that's got all the latest hot goss.
Yeah, with what's going on with social media, I mean, we're still fairly consistent with Twitter. So, and we have a great community there, and there's a lot of response going on. And obviously, there is a lot of conversation about this particular episode. So beware, there will be spoilers for this episode, and maybe even some conversations about part 2. So just again, enjoy the conversation. Just that there are going to be things that are just going to be people are going to be too excited to be not talking about it.
Yeah. You've been warned.
And that's what we do. We love hearing from our younger cadets, and we love hearing their voicemail messages that we always ask for every week. But we're going to do something a little bit different this week for this show, because this episode is a 2-parter, and because there's so much happening within these some 42 to 45 minutes worth of content. We're going to ask you to actually send us your voicemails at missionlog-prodigy@roddenberry.com. Not for this episode, but hold off on all of your thoughts until next episode. So the next podcast after this, where we're going to cover Supernova Part 2. Because, again, we want to get to everyone's voicemails, but I think that we're going to approach it in, at least for our listeners, and especially for our younger cadets, for one massive response episode.
Ooh, it's going to be big. So let us know what you're thinking after you've seen all of it. That's going to be amazing. We look forward to hearing it. Like next week's just going to be so awesome for that. I'm looking forward to that so much. And let's just to kick things off, do what we do for part 1. We're going to answer our usual questions themselves. So did you like this episode?
Yeah. I know this is a little bit of a cheat. Because we're answering questions that we technically should be like saving for next week's episode, but this is what we do. So we have that privilege hosts, because we're the hosts, right?
Yeah, we get to cheat.
Yeah, I love this episode, and it was really, really, really tough to get through. I feel like an episode like this, and all credit, to all the writers and to everyone who's producing and all this kind of stuff, but especially to Erin McNamara. This was her, her first big outing, for Star Trek Prodigy. So we're going to get into that later on in discussion. It's great. It's great that Star Trek Prodigy makes their messages so clear, in their episodes. And there's this wonderful message of like this universal truth where we should all find a place where we can belong, and that's Star Trek for many people. And I know that it's a great aspiration to strive towards. And I think that that's what this entire series has been about, not just the single episode. And if I answer any more, that means I steal from my notes for later. So,
okay. So we're putting a bookmark in it. We'll get to that a little bit later.
Yeah. How about you, Shar?
Oh, yeah. I definitely loved it. It is an emotional roller coaster in all of the ways. Somebody must have been cutting onions in the other room, because there were times I noticed I got a little teary-eyed, and it didn't look like I was enjoying this episode, but I definitely was.
Yeah, there's a lot going on. We're using that phrase a lot. The actual phrase a lot. So there's a lot going on. Yeah.
Yeah. Sure. Oh my goodness. Yes. Mm-hmm. So what was your favorite part?
I think it was when Gwen told Dal that, that Starfleet won't accept him because he's an augment, and not because of that. It's because I felt that if anyone had the obligation to do it, it would be her.
Sure. Yeah.
She did deflect Rock from saying that because it wasn't the right time. And I'm not exactly sure if there ever would have been a right time for that. But between Gwen and Dal, there's this unspoken relationship. And yes, there was that kiss. And we're going to talk about that later,
yes.
right? But
yes.
There was this moment where there are two people that just mean so much to each other that one said, you know what, if anyone's going to hear this, it has to come from me.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That was a great choice by Gwen. Just because of all the people that could have told him, they're definitely the closest, in my opinion. And as a good friend, that's what she knew she had to do, and she delivered.
What was your favorite scene?
Man, okay, there's like the whole sequence from Dal giving Gwen the chair to when she has her plea for the non-Federation allies. If I could just cheat and do that whole thing, I'm just going to cheat all over the place. We're at the finale, man. I'm going to just grab. But if I have to really narrow it down, it's got to come down to where she says, if they have ever helped you as they have helped us, then hear my words. And she's talking about Starfleet, saying, look, come out and help them. They need you now.
Right. Very powerful scene. Absolutely.
Oh, my goodness. Yes.
Yeah. All right. And there's that magical moment in mission log, morals, meanings, or messages. What did we learn?
Yeah. What did you learn?
I know that it sounds very, quaint or kind of like very trite, but again, we're looking at the base morals, meanings, and messages. And there's a scene, where Janeway is released from prison, by this unnamed Bernari security guard who has a history with Janeway. If you don't know what that history is, take a look at Voyager season 5, I believe it is.
Yes. Counterpoint
is the episode. Yes. And so the Bernard security guard, this young woman said that if it weren't for Janeway's act of kindness, then she wouldn't be standing in front of her now. And that pays off. And it pays off in ways that no one could ever possibly imagine. Right.
Right. Yeah. Janeway did not do that way back when so that this security guard would let her out of the brig now.
Right. And being able to do now what Janeway needs to do to help the Protostar crew is because of an act of kindness she did years ago. Right?
Yeah.
So that's very significant, when it comes to looking at doing the right thing when the right thing is called for. Right.
Absolutely. Yeah. That whole cliche phrase of what goes around comes around. So very true and on display in so many ways in this episode alone.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. That's one of the things I learned too. The way I put it was treat people the way you want to be treated, and it will all come full circle. If you are kind to people, hopefully they're kind back. And many people will return that favor. And you shouldn't do it with that expectation just because you never know.
Right.
But if you're being a jerk and you are hurting people, well, the world is going to come out and hurt you too. That's just eventually how that goes. You don't know when, you don't know how, but it will. The other thing I learned from this episode is you do not ever, ever, ever give up.
Yeah.
I was so proud of our kids for what seemed like the most dire of circumstances, finding a way and picking up and just being able to keep going, marching along no matter what. And I still don't know how they're getting out of this. At the very end, I mean, I was on my edge of my seat this whole episode, and at the very end, I'm just thinking, whoa, how's this one gonna come together? Because it seems crazy, but the kids have faith, and I have faith in them.
Yeah. Yep. And we're going to get to that next week. But for now, thanks, Shar, for sharing your answers. And I can't wait to hear from all of our cadets. And we're going to be very excited for their responses as well. But for now, it's time for the recap for episode 19, Supernova Part 1, written by Aaron McNamara. Thank you so much for this episode. And directed by Andrew Schmidt. Take it away, Shar.
Okay. We pick up right where we left off with the Dauntless staring down the Protostar. Vice Admiral Janeway, who's in the brig, pleads with the security officer to let her contact Starfleet now before the weapon aboard the Protostar detonates. Unfortunately, the crew of the Dauntless considers her medically unfit due to her erratic behavior during the body switch with Dal. On the bridge, Tyses is bringing Admiral Jellicoe up to speed, and he's understandably upset that a devastating weapon is now on Starfleet's doorstep. There's a plan, right? Yes, they will disable the Protostar shields so a boarding party can take over the ship. Jellicoe approves with a very big emphasis on, like, get it done yesterday, would you? And with that, Essentia can't help but smile as she fires the phasers at the Protostar. Dal knows the Protostar needs to get out of here now. Zero hotwires the ship's hardware to regain controls, but the proto-warp drive still isn't online. Dal reminds the crew they've been in worse situations than this, and they were less prepared. They might even laugh about all of this when they're at Starfleet Academy. Oh, no, Dal still does not know that augments aren't accepted into Starfleet. Rock nearly breaks the news, but Gwen knows now is not the time and intervenes with a smooth recovery. It's back to business. A wave of torpedoes are headed their way. The Protostar's small stature gives it better maneuverability, so they use that to their advantage with a move Jankum calls the slippery dipsy doodle. The move works. The name, not so much. Back on the Dauntless, Vice Admiral Janeway hasn't stopped making her case to the security officer outside the brig. If this person just knew Janeway at all, she would know she could trust Janeway. And it just so happens she does. The officer is alive because Janeway helped her people to safety from a race called the Devore back when Voyager was under Janeway's command. She never forgot what Janeway did for her and the other Benari refugees and slips the Admiral her comm badge as they shake hands. Cut to the Protostar, which is meeting its match against another tough little ship, the Defiant. The Defiant pummels the Protostar's shields, reducing them to near collapse. Soon they'll be boarded. Gwen runs off to arm herself with a phaser rifle because she knows they can't talk this through with her father. They will have to fight. Dal goes after her, though, and reminds her that if she fires that weapon, her hopes of joining Starfleet are squashed. Now, before anything else happens, Gwen needs to tell him something. And Dal interprets this as a romantic moment and kisses her, but Gwen's reaction immediately tells him that is not what she was thinking. No, she has to tell him that augments aren't admitted to Starfleet Academy. The news devastates Dal, but Gwen knows that she had to tell him the truth. As the shields collapse and the systems go offline, Dal takes the phaser rifle from Gwen. If he can't join Starfleet, he'll make sure everybody else can. Act 2. All hands on deck. Gwen seals the bridge doors and stays there with hologram Janeway. Everyone else runs off to stop the boarding party. Essentia and the Diviner make a break for the bridge, leaving Dreadnought to handle the kids. It's an intense fight, but not a fair one. Dreadnought uses a variety of weapons to incapacitate them. While this is happening, Essentia and the Diviner enter the bridge. The Diviner enters the subdeck to check the weapon and make sure it's intact. But to his surprise, Essentia closes the door behind him so he can't get out. Nothing, not even him, can stop her from preventing the Federation's first contact with Solemn. She'll do this on her own. That's Gwen's cue to face Essentia, and their fight begins. They're evenly matched, both with their weapons and excellent fighting skill. Gwen pleads with Essentia, saying this can't be what their people want. But Essentia doesn't see Gwen as one of them, and eventually overtakes her. At that moment, the Diviner does a little hot wiring himself and opens the doors to the bridge. He looks like he's about to complete their mission and send hails, but it's a ruse. Instead, he summons Gwen's weapon, which was his before it was hers, and sends it flying toward Essentia. She stops it, though, and sends it back to the Diviner, hitting him square in the stomach. Essentia gives the order to broadcast on all frequencies. Just as the Dauntless receives a signal, Janeway runs onto the bridge and orders, "Do not answer that hail!" But it's too late. The weapon sends a red shockwave into space, permeating all nearby ships. On the Dauntless view screen, Essentia explains that Starfleet left her people to tear themselves apart after they made first contact. Now, she will watch the Federation do the same. And with that, the weapon targets ships one by one and makes them fire on each other. The situation looks bleak. Is the Protostar crew finished? Not according to Rock Talk. She uses Jankum's mitt to unfreeze Murph, who in turn frees Zero, and so on. They are ready to try again. Act 3. Essentia is watching the fruits of her labor as Rock, Dal, Zero, and Jankum and Murph enter the bridge. Dal insists that she puts a stop to all of this, but she so casually says she can't. Nor does she plan to pay for what she's done. She enters Dreadnought's suit and shoots to the bridge, flying off to somewhere. In the Diviner's final moments, he requests that Gwyn unify their people in a way that he couldn't. She isn't sure how to do that, but he insists there is no barrier she cannot overcome, for she is his daughter, and as life leaves his body, it breaks down until it floats away like dust into the ether. Meanwhile, Jankum starts giving Dal a damage report when the Universal Translator starts failing. They can't understand each other, just like on Tars Lamora. Same thing's happening on the Dauntless. Gwyn reaches out to Rock, who's frustrated, and speaks words of comfort in Rock's native language. That helps Gwyn realize that she can use her knowledge of languages to reach out to the others. She is Starfleet's one remaining translator. Dal gives her the bridge's center seat, and it doesn't take long for a Klingon bird of prey to answer the call. Gwyn explains the situation in Klingon and requests aid and assistance in spreading the message far and wide. The Klingon commander asks the inevitable question, "Why should I help?" Gwyn answers that the Federation gives people a place to belong, no matter how different. Without Starfleet, that doesn't exist. Gwyn says, "If they've ever helped you as they have helped us, then hear my words." Silence. Vice Admiral Janeway applauds her efforts, but Gwyn is heartbroken. All seems lost. Admiral Janeway is busy getting her crew to the escape pods when Dr. Newham warns her of incoming torpedoes. Brace for impact. But the Klingon bird of prey decloaks and absorbs the hit with its shields in the nick of time. Soon, other non-Starfleet ships show up, even a Decora. Even more good news. The translators are back online thanks to hologram Janeway. But it's not all good news. More Starfleet ships are arriving, and the crew figures out why. Starfleet ships call for backup when they're under threat. And if that ship is compromised, it sends an SOS and so on. That means every Starfleet ship will be called to this area and subsequently be destroyed. The end. For now. Da, 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 da.
I was riveted the entire time. That's a great
Tell you what,
great
it's
recap,
intense,
Shar. Yeah.
Thanks.
That was fantastic. All right. You know what? I'm going to jump right into the observations here. I got to ask you something.
Yeah.
I'm going to ask everyone something out there. I mean, everyone of a certain age knows an episode with a certain, well, he was a captain at the time, and now he's an admiral. And it was The Chain of Command was the episode, parts 1 and 2.
Uh-huh.
Has Admiral Jellicoe, then Captain Jellicoe, has he ever not been irritated the entire time that we've seen him on screen?
I don't think so.
He's aggravated
I think
all
that's
the
just
time.
his personality.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you know what?
He is annoyed by everything.
Kudos to the guys getting the team that runs Prodigy to get Ronnie Cox back to voice Admiral Jellicoe, because
yeah, he was especially good with that scene because he has every reason to be annoyed.
Yeah. And you can't not have Ronnie Cox not be Jellicoe. And it's just, yeah.
It's unmistakable. If you know that character, that voice, it's so distinct.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Some big observations, that you have here, Shar, and a couple things that I want to talk about here before we get to the discussion. But some of the things that stood out to you, there are some interesting moments here.
Really interesting moments. Okay.
Yeah.
First and foremost, let's get this out of the way because we all want to talk about it, right?
Yeah.
That's the kiss.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So in past episodes, I think Ashley wanted them to kiss. Were you a little ambivalent about? Yes. Kiss.
Yeah, the kiss.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You were kind of on the fence. Is that correct? I don't want to speak for you.
Well, I always felt that they have this relationship. There was a little bit of kind of a flirtation there, like going all the way back to Lost and Found when she was interrogating him, with like the lychee fruit. And they always kind of just had these flirty eyes, like back and forth. Maybe it's because, they were the only ones on Tars of Lamora that were the same age. Maybe there was something else. And there were scenes that were kind of like sprinkled throughout the series so far where they have these quiet moments, but more than quiet moments. If you're going to like read into it, it's very easy to do so when you have those shared stolen moments between those two and being teenagers and stuff. But then you have this moment, you have like the kiss, but not, right?
Right. But that's immediate take backsies from Dal's point of view. Like, oh God, I really wish I wouldn't have done that. It was awkward. That's a very teenage kiss, right?
It's the heat of the moment. It was just the moment. It was bigger than both of them.
He thought it was a moment, and it was. It just wasn't the kind of moment he thought it was going to be.
Right.
I am very on the fence about a romance between these two. I know some people have been cheering for it, and I don't necessarily mind if that's the way that things end up going. But there is something really beautiful about their friendship. Mm-hmm. And it's gotten so deep at this point. They're both mutually there for each other in moments of despair and grief. Like when Gwen tells Dal that augments aren't allowed into Starfleet, she's there to comfort him.
Sure.
When Gwen's father dies, when she thinks that her plea for help has not gone through, Dal is there for her. Mm-hmm. I love that. So yeah, okay, here's where I'm really torn about it is good relationships are built off of really strong friendships. You really can't have that next step without that foundation.
Right.
But does it have to go there? I don't necessarily know if it does.
No, and I think that almost is, that begs the question, with people that want that relationship between Chakotay and Janeway to happen, even to this day, right? Because
yeah.
There's a lot of similarities there. There are parallels to be made, with Prodigy because it's so steeped in the Voyager universe, the Delta Quadrant. So,
right.
You can't help. And it obviously is part of this young adult romance, presentation that Prodigy is, for this specific age group. I don't know. And we'll see. We'll see if it works out in the end. All I know is that anything that this Prodigy team does, there's always the wait and see, but there's always the I told you so in the way that these episodes are so good.
We know it.
I'm sure that so many people out there, because there were so many starships that we've wanted to see done animated in this style, they've been pausing the screen and trying to figure out what's this? We at 6 minutes and 30 seconds, we clearly see that the protostar is being fired on by the Defiant.
Definitely the USS Defiant. Yeah. No doubt about it.
Super easy to see. And then right in front of the protostar, there's a Centaur class ship and a Sovereign class ship that has been screenshotted as the Enterprise E. I believe, is it E or F? One of those two? I think
in this period, it would be the E. Mm-hmm. But I have not personally gone through all of these screen caps yet because, frankly, I haven't had the time and there's too many of them. There's people on the internet who know what they're doing.
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of ships and obviously they're there because they want to show how Starfleet is going to get wrecked by the living construct. So
wrecked. Red and wrecked.
Speaking of wrecked. So there's this interesting thing with, I found that the living construct almost felt like the La Brea tar pits. There's a history in the La Brea tar pits where the tar pit, it traps an animal, then a predator jumps on that animal because it's trapped, and then it gets trapped, and then another predator who's going to get the predator to get the other, it gets trapped upon trapped. Oh my gosh. And I'm like, okay, so this whole battle sequence, I know it has its own name, but for right now, for me, it's the Battle of La Brea. Because it just feels like the La Brea tar pits, like historically, right?
I am totally on board with this. That is perfect. Writers, do you hear this?
Yeah. The Battle of La Brea Quadrant or something like that.
I think the Battle of La Brea is great. It's going to be like the next Wolf 359.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. All okay. Right. In my head, that is what it is. I don't care what anybody else calls it. You nailed it. That is too good to pass up.
We have time for about one or two more observations, so we can jump right into the discussion because I know we have a lot to say.
Oh, my goodness. Well, okay, big question, and we may or may not get the answer to this. I have no idea. Essentia.
Yeah.
Where's she going? Where does she have any plans where she's going? Or is she just going to kind of float out there until somebody picks her up? Like, how is she not going to get fired at? She's in the middle of a big old battle.
Maybe this was her end game. Like, I don't care as long as I stop the Federation. My kind of like my assignment's over. It's like Nero, right? In Star Trek 2009. It's not. He doesn't have an escape plan. He just needs to do the one thing that he needed to accomplish, right? From traveling
Maybe
through time.
so, right? She doesn't necessarily care if she comes out alive. She just does what she had to do.
Yeah. And speaking like of Essentia, and speaking of Essentia so the voice actor for Essentia, Jamila Jamil, right?
Mhm.
British. And the voice actor for Gwyn, also British. And John Noble, Australian, but's playing off as British. So are we going to hear Gwyn maybe revert to, is this her solemn accent? Is that the accent of her people?
Maybe.
Oh,
that's an interesting thought.
So I don't know if that's going to happen maybe, say, next season, but yeah.
I don't know. That's a cool thing to think about, while we're going to be eventually between seasons. Yeah. Does she ever go back there, and is that the natural thing, or is that just maybe these particular people? I don't know.
I don't know. Just one of those weird observations. That's why we're in observations. So.
That's right. I got one more thing that I found interesting. Essentia says to Gwen, "You're just a mistake."
Yeah.
Which is exactly how Dal sees himself.
Yeah.
Interesting parallel.
Well, I mean,
just further connecting these two.
Gwen was also genetically created. Right?
That's right. Yeah. I mean, you could say she was a lab baby.
Right. And
so
interesting thing about these genetically created offspring, if you will, they're both prodigies in their own right, but they were genetically created. So is that going to be a theme? Yeah, maybe moving forward. And I'm wondering, I'm glad you brought that up. One of the last things I want to get across here, Gwen's, when she walked through Barnes Frex's medical scanner, she was unidentified until she identified herself. Dal himself was unidentified, but flagged by a red alert saying that, please contact Starfleet. So Gwen, even if she wanted to go into Starfleet, would she have been considered an augment?
This is a really good question. Like, is she considered genetically enhanced?
Right. Because of not being born either biologically and then also maybe manipulated in a way because the diviner needed her to do certain things.
Right. That's going to be up to Starfleet brass, I guess, when we get there.
Yeah, if and when we get there. Yeah.
I mean, it seems like a fairly rigid rule. So that's a very good question. And I don't know. We'll have to see how that shakes out when it shakes out.
All right. So these are the questions that maybe some of our young cadets maybe want to ask, maybe want to send us for later. But for now, we have a few minutes here to jump into some pretty heavy discussion points, because even though that, again, Prodigy is of or has been made for a certain age range, it doesn't lack for very deep morals, meanings, and messages. So let's jump right into it, Shar.
Let's do it. Okay. This episode is an absolute roller coaster emotionally. We have highs, we have lows, and this all stems from the really good rule of writing, which is make everything, like the worst thing that could possibly happen in any given moment, make it come true and make your characters figure it out. This is what's happening here. Mm-hmm. They have tried so hard to avoid the construct activating and harming Starfleet, only for it to happen in front of their eyes. So now what?
Yeah.
I'm glad they didn't shy away from that, because they could have resolved things a lot more happily by the construct never doing its thing.
Right.
Because that was the goal. So they didn't meet their goal. Now they got to go further. How do they do that? I'm glad there's this challenge.
And I think that because of the way that the series has been developed, over the course of seeing all of these different breakthrough moments with all the different, of our younger crew and cast, I think that there's one scene that kind of sums up how they're going to at least have the ability to be able to handle this problem. That's when Dal said, we've been in worse jams with less practice.
And they have. We've seen it.
Right. And maybe this is the worst of those jams, but it's not like they haven't earned the ability to be able to problem solve, come together as a team, depend on each other as a crew, fight until like they can't fight anymore, because all of that is what has brought him up to this point. There was a time where Dal said, well, if we can't bring, the protostar to the Federation, we can bring the Federation to people that need our help, right? As a representation of Starfleet, and let Starfleet say, hey, you know what? These kids are doing good work on our behalf. Maybe there's a way that we can, save them from this protostar trap, which they now can't, right? So
no. So again, when the credits started rolling, my jaw really was on the floor. Like, okay, wow, this is a really good part one, because I have no idea what's going to happen in part two. How in the world are they going to resolve this? Mm-hmm. So I'm very excited about next week. Can you tell?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of ups and downs with this. So the down, the construct gets activated. The up, Gwyn pleads, for like non-Starfleet to help. The down, there's more Starfleet ships that are being trapped. The up, are we there yet? Is there an up? We don't know. So there's this emotional roller coaster that's really taking a toll on all of us as the audience, because they're like, oh, we figured it out. We didn't figure it out. We're succeeding. We're failing. And next episode. Right?
Yeah. And then, my gosh.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right? Yeah. You know how in Preludes we had to take that deep breath, and then we didn't realize we had to hold it for Ghost in the Machine? Well, we know with a 2-part finale, yes, you have to hold your breath and keep going.
Yeah.
And that's where we're at right now. And boy, do I feel it.
Yeah.
Yeah. This episode also hits so many emotional notes with our characters. Dal and Gwyn especially have just really come full circle for me. I don't know about you, but they absolutely stand out, both as just a part of the greater unit, but together as friends and as individuals. If you think back to Dal, how would he have handled this kind of a situation in episode 1? It would have been all about him. He really is what he aspired to be. And for as many doubts as he has had about what it means to be a captain and is he capable of that, he has more than proven himself that yes, he can, because he is willing to sacrifice the one thing that he's wanted more than anything this whole time, to join Starfleet, for everybody else. Because if he can't, he's going to make sure that everybody else can.
Right.
That's what a captain does. You sacrifice for the greater good.
It's the Kobayashi Maru scenario, right? Even though
is.
And it's being acted out in real time with the decision of, okay, well, I could quit because I'm not going to get into Starfleet, so there's nothing in it for me. Or I'm going to take everything that I've learned, even like from the episode Kobayashi, which was just a problem-solving exercise for him to do, just to show like, yeah, I can do Starfleet, whatever, blah, blah, blah. How hard could it be?
Yeah.
This entire back half of the season has been about Dal growing from not only his mistakes, but his greater understanding of what it means to be a captain. It's not just a word, right?
Absolutely.
It's a mentality. It's an attitude. And when he finally said to Gwyn, when Gwyn said, I'm your last translator, he stepped aside and said, Captain.
Gave her the chair.
You know,
he would not have done that even in the first half of the season, I don't think, because that chair was his. He was claiming it.
Right.
So very selfless is where Dal is at right now. And if you think that's what a captain does, like with Janeway, helps the refugees. She didn't know what that was going to lead to. She just did because that was the right thing to do. These people deserve to live. Help them to safety. And now?
You know, with the way that these writers, you know, in this case, Aaron McNamara, right? They're looking at the history of Star Trek, and then how can we add on to such a rich and robust history from certain details that have happened, either, let's say, All the World's a Stage going all the way back to, Garevik and this throwaway episode in a sense, throwaway episode in a way, or just a forgotten episode. It's not an episode that's hailed as one of the greatest episodes of all time, but maybe neither is this episode in Voyager, where this one security guard was one of like a handful of children at the time who now, because of what Janeway did, she was able to go to Starfleet. She was inspired by Janeway to do something greater so that she could serve her people and serve Starfleet the way that Janeway did her people. So It's a pay it forward without even knowing that it was a pay it forward. And I'm sure this entire time, this particular Bernari security guard, whose name was not mentioned, all we know that she was a young woman, she probably was said, you know what, there's going to be that moment where I'm going to repay Janeway.
Or even if she's not repaying Janeway, she will find some way to pay it forward. The act of kindness she was shown, she will do that with somebody else. It just so happened in this instance, it was Janeway.
Yeah. And it was that time. It was kind of like, the winds of fate. They're blowing everyone towards a certain direction. Now, the one thing I did really like about studying this episode, Counterpoint, or revisiting it, is that these Bernari were being hunted as refugees because of their telepathic abilities, if I'm not mistaken.
That's right. Yes.
So without even having to go that extra step, knowing that people are probably going to go back and watch Counterpoint, for this very particular canonical detail.
And you should. It's a good episode.
It is a good episode. And I was like, yeah, I have seen this episode. I remember this. And now with this particular security guard having that ability, she didn't have to say it because it's already been done, in the history of Star Trek. So it's like, she probably believes Janeway because she knows telepathically that Janeway's telling her the truth.
This is true. This is true. But nevertheless.
Right. That's just one added detail. And I know this isn't in our notes, but this one thing that I texted you, Shar, like one of the reasons why this works so well is because Prodigy on its own without Easter eggs is incredible. It's just the Easter eggs that make the layers so much more profound in the storytelling for the older audience that knows all of these details.
Certainly. Right? Yeah. But at the same time, Prodigy has done an incredible job of getting these kind of things into the story, but not to the point where if you are brand new to Star Trek and you don't have no idea what the episode Counterpoint is, you are still getting what you need information-wise, as well as the emotional beats. You're not losing anything. This still works for you. Yeah. And I can't say that of all Star Trek.
No, and I think that's where, again, there are certain things where if you pay attention, and give any of these new series, the proper due, for watching them and for understanding what story they're trying to tell. When you really look at Prodigy, there is that surface element of a young adult audience direction, but there's also so much more. And I hope that through the podcast and through people's passion about sharing their love about it online and in social media, that more and more fans will be able to appreciate for it for what this is. But that's me coming full circle with my thoughts, but there is a coming full circle observation or discussion point here that I think probably is it's most profound to me, in this episode.
Yes. Yeah. In fact, I think we can both tie some of these together because we have the great speech about what the Federation is, what Starfleet does, and we've talked about Dal's sacrifice, but we need to talk about Gwyn a little bit now because she too has completely come full circle. You remember in Preludes when she's talking to the bartender, aka her father, he says, "You're going to need to find your own way." She has. She did here. And it also strikes me just how profound. I was not expecting to really get emotional or even care that the diviner was dying. But guess what? They found a way to where that became a very emotionally charged scene, which still kind of boggles my mind a little bit because after all that he has done, after all the harm he has caused, he has sent her on her way, Gwyn.
Yeah.
And essentially, she has a new course now. She needs to do what her father couldn't. He might have been very well intentioned, but he did it with a negative outcome. She needs to be the person who does unite their people with a positive outcome.
Right.
Yeah. That's what she can, and I'm hoping will do.
I love that the secret for both when she was still under like the diviner's authority and now that she's striking out on her own with this gift. The secret that ties those two storylines together is her ability or her gift of languages, secretly created by the diviner for her to be able to do nefarious things like, talk to the Kazon slavers or, speak politically on her behalf to further the Valnukat's agenda through the diviner because the diviner couldn't do it alone or because he was too enfeebled or infirm to do so. But now she sees that gift in a completely different way. The gift of being able to break down barriers between species that can't understand each other. She essentially becomes what Starfleet is about. It's about bringing all of these different theories and philosophies and languages and making them all understand that if we work together, we're going to be able to accomplish so much more. And I love that that's now her goal. It's her goal to be able to do that for her people. In contrast to why she was designed to do it in the first place, by the diviner.
Very much. I mean, coming out of the gate, Gwen was a potential, maybe even bad guy kind of character. Her motives were not clear. They weren't necessarily good. Mm-hmm. And she maybe didn't come across in the most favorable light, but she did a couple important things, which was she reversed course when she saw the impact of her actions and did not like that. And now she is on her way, kind of on the other side of the pendulum here, to become a unifier of her people, using her gifts for good. I do find it interesting that Starfleet has not only kind of transformed her life and her perspective, her mission, all of that, but also I could say the same of the diviner. When he has that moment with Janeway, letting her go, even though he's still going to carry out his plan, he's, I think, seen just enough of Starfleet, of the enemy, if you will, to understand where they're coming from and has a little more of a deeper connection, a little heart. And so he wasn't going to completely change his mind, but he was at least going to have an act of kindness toward her.
Yeah. And we touched on this in earlier episodes or episodes maybe 2 or 3, prior to this, where the Valnukat, the order, the last like 100 or so that were left, they took everything with them from Solum. And that meant like all of their rage, all of their vengeance, all of the plans for, seeking retribution, from Starfleet, but at the cost of what? Right. And I think, the diviner maybe having that 20 years or that, 17-year head start that he had over Essentia or the Vindicator being living up to her name for sure.
Definitely.
I think once he had Gwyn or once he created Gwyn, I think that started to soften kind of his agenda where, as a parent, maybe he's like, I want something better for her. Right. I don't want something that's I don't want a future that's just filled with retribution and vengeance. I know that's how he got there. That's how obviously he was able to get through the wormhole and establish, the parameters of his mission. But I think that changed over time, and I think that the only thing that kept him on course was his dreadnought.
Maybe so. And that might also be why Essentia said you were always the weaker one or something to that effect.
Right. So
because there's a reason why she's the Vindicator.
And she very well may have been higher rank or more influential than he was when they were on Solum back then.
Maybe. We don't know that, do we?
We don't know that yet. And now she has escaped and she's free. And maybe we'll see more of that story later on.
Yeah. Is she going to show up in part 2?
Well, that's what we're going to have to get to because we're going to wrap up our show, Shar. And,
man.
In one more week or in one more show, we're going to get to Supernova Part 2. But, now it's time for some parting thoughts, some of the things that, that have, maybe developed during this conversation or one last thought that we wanted to share.
Golly. Well, okay. I knew this was going to be a roller coaster experience. I mean, we knew going in this was going to be a 2-parter, and this show has done nothing but keep upping the bar every time. So my expectations were high and they were exceeded. It was this was an incredible part 1 of a 2-parter. I can't even imagine what we're in store for next week. I really don't know how it's going to end, and I'm so excited about that. I'm glad I can't predict it. This was a very emotionally charged episode. We talked a lot about that. It was devastating, downright beautiful. Nami's musical score was through the roof good.
Yeah.
And I guess at this point, all I really can say is I look forward to ugly crying with you for part 2 next week.
Yeah, make sure that you have enough tissues on hand, because I am pretty sure that this is going to be one of the best. If we use episodes 1 through 19 as any indicator, episode 20 is going to be something incredibly special and fantastic.
We're going to be wrecked.
Yeah, I mean, we've been waiting so long for kind of like the series to wrap up, or this one particular season, with all the breaks in between, and with like kind of like the delays, and it just being able to complete this story has been something that many of us have been really wanting to see come to fruition ever since episode 1. I just don't think that we thought it would go this direction, which,
had no idea.
To make a long story short, when you have a writing team and vision, and quality, and the way that this whole series has unfolded from when you loathed the main antagonist, and then you felt so incredibly sorry and empathetic towards him at the very end, you know that you have something special. You know that there is a plan involved with the development of this series and how it affects us. But we only have 1 episode left, and we'll see if that remains to be true. Right?
Yeah.
So that's it.
Okay. Well, thank you everybody for joining us here on Mission Log Prodigy. If you enjoyed our show, please make sure you like, share, and subscribe, and do all those cool things. Subscribe to Mission Log Prodigy on the Mission Log Prodigy playlist on YouTube or on Roddenberry Entertainment. Mission Log Prodigy is produced by Roddenberry Entertainment. Production and technical direction, it's a hard word to say. It's by the fantastic Earl Green. And our website for your opportunity to comment and connect with us is at missionlogpodcast.com. And if you want to support us directly, you can do so at patreon.com/missionlog.
Thank you, everyone, for taking the time to be with us. And we look forward to sharing our thoughts with you on the season finale, episode 20, Supernova, part 2, next week, where we will wrap up this monumental season with our very special incoming transmission. So, cadets, make sure you send them to us at missionlog-prodigy@roddenberry.com. And you can send in your answers for both episodes at missionlog-prodigy@roddenberry.com. We can't wait to hear what you have to say about this extraordinary season finale.
Woo!
Join us next week for Supernova Part 2.
This is a Roddenberry podcast. For more great podcasts, visit podcast.roddenberry.com.